Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Josh here. This is Horror Hangouts, episode 10. And for this evening's episode, I have a special guest all the way from England. I have Beverly Price. She's the author of her most recent book called, and it's going to catch my breath here when I say this. It's A to Z of the So Bad They're Good, the Bad and Ugly Horror Films. Welcome to the show, Beverly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I guess tell us about this book here. Tell us what it's about first, because this is actually a horror nonfiction book. But tell us about a little bit what the book is about. I think the title says it all, but if you want to go more in depth on that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the title is very much self-explanatory, but it is looking at films that are camp classics.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got your films that are somewhere in the middle. They have some redeeming feature. And then you have the films that you thought, why did I waste my time and money watching this film? Um, but what I'd like to do as well is I like to look at things like, are there hidden meanings in these camp classics? Is it actually something more to them than what is on the surface level? Or to those really, really bad films, is there a reason why it was so bad? So the production history, or the fact that it was so low budget, or in
Right.
some cases, it was just that the people weren't really genre fans, and they were just doing it to get onto like a bandwagon of what was popular at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many movies did do you know approximately how many movies you listed in this book altogether?
I don't think I actually counted them, but on average, each
Okay.
letter has at least 3 to 4 entries.
Uh-huh.
So you're then looking at that times 26. So yeah, quite a few.
So yeah, about over what definitely over about 100 then or so, or a little bit
Roughly,
over
yeah.
there. All right. Well, that sounds. I mean, what kind of research did you have a base where you wanted to start with, like a particular year of movies, and just kind of worked your way up, or did you have an idea which movies you wanted to look at? Or did you discover some new ones you hadn't seen?
So there's always the ones that are people are synonymous. When you say the words so bad they're good, people are always
Hmm.
expecting certain types of films. So I
Right.
knew that Birdemic was going to be in there, for example, or Troll
Right.
2, because as soon as you say so bad they're good, those are the ones that come into people's heads straight away. A lot of them I just stumbled upon. With streaming services now,
Hmm.
you have a plethora of films that you can just find with just the thumbnail and sometimes even a very brief thing, and you go, oh, I'll see what this is like. And like I said,
Right.
sometimes you come across gold. Most of the times you don't. There's a
Right.
reason why they're not known. But that was the joy of it. Also, I like reviewers. I follow a lot of YouTube reviewers like Good
Hmm.
Bad Flicks, Brandon Tenold, and Weird Movies of Mark. So a lot
Hmm.
of them then gave me inspiration into what to go find myself as well.
Okay, really good. And that book is, I know it's available on Amazon. And I have, for those who end up watching this, I do have the link to the Amazon link to where you can purchase the book. Um, when you were, I lost my train of thought. And of course, you were also, of course, we met on Substack. And
Yeah,
of course, I also have a link to your Substack page. How long have you been on Substack now?
not long, like less than a month, I'd say.
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah.
pretty. Guess we found each other pretty quick. I've been on there since January, so
Oh, yeah.
been kind of new to me as well. Um, so out of this book, are there any movies? Maybe give me like 4 or 5 examples of movies that you think people should probably check out that you thought were actually better than you thought they were going to be and are worth looking at. You have any of those movies?
Yep. So the one I always cite is bloody muscle bodybuilder in hell, or AKA Japanese Evil Dead.
Okay.
And so, as the subtitle says, or was also known as, it's Japan's take on Evil Dead.
Okay.
So one of the joys about it is it's 63 minutes long, so you could watch it in your lunch break. But I think what appealed to me as well as the dedication of the director. He spent 20 years doing the film because he wanted the
Mm-hmm.
technology to catch up with his visions. So there's a lot of
Okay.
very much that Sam Raimi gore to it with,
Mm-hmm.
your sort of claymation and stuff like that. But he wanted to make, as a love letter to a film he clearly enjoyed, he wanted to make the best that he could of it, and took 20 years to do it.
Oh
And
wow.
now it's on places like Shudder. And I think when he probably started, all those years ago, he probably never thought it would get that well known. So I think it's a testament to a horror fan doing what they want to do and spending the time doing it until they get it perfect.
That's pretty remarkable that he was willing to put that much time in just so he could make this movie the way he wanted it to, even if it took him 20 years to do it and so forth. So that's pretty interesting. Any other movies that you would recommend giving a watch that's um, in this book?
Another classic, if you're wanting some kind of horror or people who went on to be horror icons, Galaxy of Terror, which
Hmm.
is the Roger Corman kind of
Right.
alien knockoff, for want of a better description. But you've got James Cameron, who does all of the kind of the set designs and stuff like that. So it looks amazing.
Yes,
But
it
you also
does.
have Sid Haig in there. You
Hmm.
also have Robert Englund in there. You've also got then on the actress's name has literally just gone out of my head, but Joni from Happy Days in there
Yes,
as
Aaron
well.
Moran.
Eh,
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
yeah. Um, and yes, there is one scene that is slightly problematic because we've been Roger Corman film. There has to be
Right.
boobs in there at some point, and
Right.
the way that they get the boobs is a little bit uncomfortable. So I can imagine that might not be for everybody. But if you can get past that scene,
Hmm.
it is one of these really kind of camp films that spun off from Aliens, but also has the kind of existential crisis to it, because they end up on a planet that creates their fears
Oh yeah.
into reality, kind of like Event Horizon before Event Horizon, really.
Hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's one I haven't seen in quite a while. It's probably been a good 20 years since the last time I saw that one, but I mean, it is a good movie and really for something that's kind of low budget, it does have good production value. I would say most of the stuff that Roger Corman had done, you know, dating back to the 50s always had good production value to them. So, yeah, that is a must watch for those of you who haven't seen Galaxy of Terror. Definitely that's one to check out. And like I said, this is with a really young Robert Englund in there, and of course Sid Haig is in that. So, and I can't that one actress I skips my name as well. So, but yeah, really good movie. Yeah. So how long did it take you to write this book? How much research was involved in doing so?
So when I first started the book, I was working like most writers do. I was working on several other things at the same time, and it was getting
Mhm.
to a point where I was finding, I think 3 or 4 years had gone past before I'd published anything, and it was because I was working on too many things at once.
Right.
So at the beginning of 2023, I went, right, let's pick one, just focus on one, and see if you can just work on that for a year. And I chose the A to Z. And so
Right.
there was at least 18 months solid
Wow.
of working on that, never mind all the time that had happened before that. So you've got to watch the films, I would say at least, well, I watch them at least 3 times. So
Okay.
once to get your initial reaction,
Mhm.
once then again in the background while you're kind of doing research. and then
Mhm.
another time again, and just to make sure I haven't missed anything while kind of going through it again. Um, so that all takes time as well. Um, and certain films have more information about them than others. Again, the films often fell into the ugly category. There
Right.
wasn't a lot of production information in that, and there wasn't any kind of hidden meanings and stuff like that. So they tended to be quite short. But something like, say, Life Force, for example,
Right.
I ended up going down a rabbit hole when I came across an article that described the way that the victims look after they've been sucked of their life force is
Mhm.
very reminiscent of how people looked suffering from the AIDS um, or the HIV virus.
Right.
And
Yeah.
considering the time that Life Force came out, I started going down a rabbit hole of, well, was this intentional or not? Now, I don't know. Obviously, only
Mhm.
Toby Hooper would know that. But I
Right.
think it is very interesting that when that thought is planted, that you can't see beyond that. And the fact then that the film ended outside a church, which is
Mhm.
almost like you need to put moral restrictions on your sexuality. You can't let sexuality go free because life force happens, I think is a very interesting idea, whether or not it is intentional.
That's interesting, and I never really knew that about that, and never really thought about it. Of course, that came out in '85, and I was 11 at that time, so it's like, hmm, it wouldn't have, and I didn't see the movie until years after the fact, so it wouldn't have been anything that would have dawned on me. But maybe had I seen it at the time and say I was 2021, maybe I would have put that together. But even back then, I mean, you had that what they would call the AIDS epidemic or some, I think is what they were calling it back then.
Yeah,
But even then, information wasn't out like it is today. We didn't really know what it did. We There was a lot, of course, unfortunate prejudicial stereotypes surrounding that disease. Um, but back then, it's interesting. I wonder sometimes because sometimes Toby Hooper, as in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, would often have some very hidden, subtle social messages in there. So it makes me wonder if he was, or maybe not. Maybe it was just a goofy movie he wanted to
yeah,
do, and it just sometimes movies end up that way because I know plenty of people who will overanalyze, say, Halloween, and they'll ask John Carpenter about, was this about this? And he goes, no, I was just trying to make a simple little slasher film. That's all. It's just about a killer killing babysitters. You're
yeah.
reading too much into it, but you never know sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, with that whole Virginia Final Girl, isn't it? You know, people say, oh,
Hmm.
well, John Carpenter purposely did that. And he was like, no, the reason why the other people got killed is because they were distracted, not
Yeah,
because they were no longer virgins. But we've attributed that to it.
right. And really, the final girl trope started probably long before Halloween anyway. If you go
Yeah.
back to, oh, probably Black Christmas, maybe, or Texas
Yes.
Chainsaw Massacre, both of those come out in the same year. That's really where I think that might have started. But Halloween was a lot more commercially successful, so they go to that one first.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. So when did speaking of horror movies, well, one more thing about the book. What are Give me one example of the ones that were just flat out ugly that you remember that you had to cover in the book that you wish you hadn't? What was like one of the absolute worst ones that you watched?
Jurassic Shark.
Okay. I
And it became,
heard of
it
it,
became,
haven't seen it.
yeah, it became a standard joke within the book as well. So I'd go, this film is bad, not as bad as Jurassic Shark. And it became my sort of like my low
Punchline.
bar.
Very
And
good, very good. I'd heard of it, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
I think it's like a lot
No.
of those. shark exploitation films. Again, like you said, you had the whole Alien knockoff. Obviously, Jaws spawned a whole lot of knockoffs as well. I think the main
Right.
problem with Jurassic Shark was the special effects. If you're going to have a shark
Mm-hmm.
in your movie and you don't have the budget for
Mm-hmm.
it, then maybe you shouldn't be making a shark movie.
That bad, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I get you. Yeah, because I would say even the Sharknado movies got the sharks looking okay. So,
Yeah.
but wonderful. Now you have written other books prior to this that were more fiction books. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Would you say doing nonfiction was more of a, I guess, more of a challenge than writing regular fiction?
Yes and no, because there's different
Hmm.
aspects to it. Um, you don't get writer's block when you're writing nonfiction. The only problem is if you
Right,
catch up on all of the films, then you don't have anything to work on. Whereas if you
right.
have writer's block doing fiction, that can take a long time to get out of that kind of like that slump.
Uh-huh.
Um, the difference being, though, that one of the good things about fiction is that you can be more descriptive, you can be more kind of imaginative, whereas obviously the non-fiction is a little bit more factual. You can put metaphors and similes and stuff like that. You can see, I remember one of the films I described as having more denim than a Bewitched concert, which if might mean nothing to you as an American, but for a British person, they were an Irish band that wore
Yeah.
double denim.
Okay.
So you can do those kind of similes, but it is more kind of factual based.
Or you can say not as bad as not as bad or yeah, not as bad as Jurassic Shark. That would be
Exactly.
a great. So what got you into writing in the first place? When did the writing bug start for you?
I actually started in my teens. I was always really, really. I was encouraged to read a lot as a child. I think my
Mhm.
parents understood I was not going to be a physically fit child, so they encouraged my brain instead. So reading was a major part of my childhood, and I think that then spawned the writing. It was actually poetry and plays I actually started writing in high school. I
Oh
used to
wow.
make my friends put on plays and stuff like that. And I remember, I don't remember the plot, but I do remember creating a play, and I used the music of Queen, the band,
Okay.
in my play. And I was like, if I
Oh
knew what was
wonderful.
going to happen in the future, I might have copyrighted that.
Oh
Because I
God.
remember there being an Irish Queen, and she sang the song Killer Queen in the play that I wrote. That's the only thing I can remember from it.
Oh wow. Well, that's a good enough band to use for that. So that's terrific
Exactly.
there. What was like your first fiction book? What was the name of the first fiction book you wrote? Or
This is going to really age me. The
okay,
first fiction book I wrote was called Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me. Now, that may sound familiar.
it
That's
does.
because it was the U2 song from Batman Forever. So,
Oh, okay. No, don't
yeah.
don't feel bad because I remember that song coming out and I remember seeing that movie. So yeah, and I was like probably 20 or so when that came out. So didn't age
I
yourself
mean,
that bad.
yeah. I mean, it has nothing to do with Batman. I don't know what, it was just that title of that song just seemed to fit
Hmm.
with what I ended up. And I was 13. I'd gone on a French exchange. I was staying with a boy. I was really painfully shy. I didn't want
Uh-huh.
to, hang out with the family and that. And so I stayed in my room, and I wrote this book.
Hmm.
And in a week, I wrote a novel. And it was about teen who was possessed by a demon. He had to seduce and kill 15 girls to become human again. But the 15th girl he fell in love with.
Oh,
And
okay.
so couldn't fulfill his destiny and decided that he'd rather be a demon than kill this girl. You can tell it's written by a 13-year-old.
That's actually pretty good. That's not a bad concept at all, really. That sounds like kind of morbid, but that's good. I like
Yeah,
that. It's like
yeah, sounds always a
a
morbid child.
a romance story gone wrong at the end. That's perfect, really. So, sounds good. Sounds good. Um, so obviously you watched all these horror movies doing this book. You wouldn't have done it if you weren't already a horror movie fan. So when did your love for horror movies begin? Do you know exactly when, what movie kind of brought you into the genre?
I'm definitely not that meme, you know, oh, I knew I was a horror fan when I saw The Exorcist at 3. That is
Right.
not me.
Okay.
Um, being a child of the 80s and growing up in Britain with the video nasty, you know,
Mhm.
hysteria, horror, well, modern horror was not allowed in the house. So I never saw Freddy, I never saw Jason. And Child's Play was a big no-no because of a very infamous murder case, which I'm not going to go into it for this podcast.
Right. I think
Um,
I'm aware of it though, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it was so ingrained in me that this stuff was horrible that even when I went around friends' house and they would show these films, I would cover my eyes. So it
Mhm.
took me a long time to kind of engage into horror. But one of the many books I started writing was a kind of autobiography through horror. And actually, our horror had always been part of my life. I was
Right.
allowed to watch the Hammer horror films, and they were
Right.
very influential on me.
Mhm.
Um, and mentioning reading, I was allowed to read horror. So I grew up on the Point Horror series of books, which you
Okay.
then progressed into Stephen King. And then I had the argument then, well, if I've read the Stephen King book, why can I not watch the Stephen King TV
Movie.
adaptation?
Right.
So that's how I then got into horror. But again, being a child of the 80s, though, horror was everywhere, even if it wasn't described as it. You know, you had, you know, Return to Oz, you had
Mhm.
Labyrinth, Dark Crystal. I mean, these all had horrific elements into them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, we had, we'd call them infomercials, probably you'd call them public service announcements,
Mhm.
where you'd have, you know, don't go and play on electric pylons, and they'd show kids being blown up. You know, and this is just part of your normal, you know, TV. But I think one of the biggest things that had an influence on me was the very infamous BBC mockumentary Ghostwatch.
Oh wow. I think I've heard of that.
Um, yeah, which I don't remember there being a disclaimer beforehand to say that it was fiction. Even
Mhm.
now,
Right.
it was, it was as far as we were concerned, my parents were concerned, it was a documentary. You had respected presenters on it, so you know it seemed to perpetuate this factual element of it, and it um yeah, it went very scary very quickly with Mr. Pipes, who was
Uh-huh.
this the ghost at the house. And eventually he infiltrated the studio where then all the lights would go off, and it just ended with the main presenter possessed by this demon, and then the program finished. And it just terrified a whole generation of children who were expecting this
Wow.
kind of factual. And if you've seen The Conjuring 2, the Enfield haunting,
Mhm.
that was very much an influence for Ghostwatch. And the Enfield haunting
Okay.
is something that I'd become obsessed with. So when I knew Conjuring 2 was doing it,
Uh-huh.
I was really looking forward to it. And then they brought in The Nun, which is not to do with the Enfield haunting at all. And it was like,
Right.
oh,
What are you doing?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was yeah, I've heard about the video nasties and all that you guys had over there. Over here, I guess we were a lot more laxed about some of that stuff, but even then, I wasn't really allowed to watch too much at a younger age. So I kind of started my journey started with the Universal old Universal films, the
yeah.
Dracula and Frankenstein, and kind of just worked my way up to the ladder, got into the Hammer films because I remember there was seems like Saturday afternoons they would show one of these horror movies from the 50s or 60s, and oftentimes it's either a Vincent Price film or it was a
Oh,
Hammer film. So, and Hammer or say horror Dracula is one of my all-time favorites, so it's right up there. But yeah, it took me a while to get into modern horror. Once I got into the Halloweens, the Friday the 13th, and then got into Hellraiser, which movie that's by and large a British horror film for the most part. It's
yes,
made in
yeah,
England, a couple American actors, but for the most part, it's very much a British movie. So
yeah,
kudos to England. We love you, Clive Barker. So that's my
yeah.
favorite author. So
And what's
terrific.
really interesting about Hellraiser as well is, and it's one of the films that I reference in the book as well, is Warhead Rex, which is also
Yes.
based on a short story by Clive Barker.
Hmm.
And again, it's so bad, it's good. If you've read the book, no, it's not as good as the book, but there is an element of joy to the actual film. Um, but he was so annoyed with how they did that film that he went, right, the next film I'll direct myself, and that's how we got him then directing Hellraiser. And if
Yes.
nothing else, we can thank Rawhead Rex for that.
Yeah, that's the one I'm just gonna have to just kind of like grin and bear it and watch it. I've yet to seen it. I've heard about it. I've read the short story it's based off of, and I'm sure I'll watch it. I'll understand why Clive Barker decided he's gonna make his own movie this time around. But it's probably worth a watch anyway, just to see what they exactly messed up on. I guess so.
The main problem is in the book. Obviously, Rawhead
Mm.
Rex is a proper phallic symbol. There's no ifs
Right.
or buts about it. It is what it
Right.
is. Whereas obviously the
Hmm.
film couldn't really get away with that. And I think
Right.
once you take that element away from it, because it's meant to be about kind of female power, once you've
Hmm.
taken away that phallic image, you've kind of taken away then the element of the female power winning overall at the end as well.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I could see that. That would probably take away from it. It was like just you just mentioned that made me think of Slumber Party Massacre because as we know
Yes.
the killer is using this big long drill which they say and it wouldn't surprise me cuz and I can't remember her name the director who's very much a feminist. um it was an obvious attempt. I mean, that movie's basically about, I guess you could say, the patriarchy or misogyny, and that's what that drill
Yeah.
represented, the phallic thing and whatnot. So that's it. Talk about Rawhead Rex. That made me automatically think of that of a
I,
totally
I,
different movie, but it's kind of the same themes almost. It sounds
oh
like.
yeah, agreed. I'm not sure if she's the director, but she's definitely connected to it. I think it's Rita Mae Brown
Mm-hmm.
is connected to Slumber Party Massacre, and you can see it from the poster. Is it the image is the drill
Mm-hmm.
between his legs, so they're not being subtle about it. And
No.
in fact, in Slumber Party Massacre 2, that's even more obvious because every time she goes to be intimate with the guy, her boyfriend, that's when she starts dreaming of the driller killer. So it's even more obvious in the second one.
Oh yeah. And I wonder how many people really caught on to that at the time of those movies were being made. It, and like I said, I can't remember. It was only 10 or 11 when those movies came out and didn't see them until years later. But makes me wonder if they even caught on to that or wasn't until a few years later they look back and goes, oh, that's what that movie meant. And so it's because oftentimes I don't think we always catch on to movies when they first come out until a few years later, and we look back as, oh, that's what they were trying to say with that movie, and I think that's true of a lot of movies. Really, we don't really realize because we're mainly watching for the effects and the kills and all that stuff, and we're following the characters, but we really don't
Mm.
get the story underneath the layers, I guess you could say. So yeah,
Especially if the film
very
is
good.
particularly like Slumber Party Massacre 2, where it is so overly camp. You know, you are
Hmm.
so concentrating on that character dancing about with his, electric drill guitar, which is such a beautiful killing machine, that you kind of, the subtext then kind of passes you by because you're concentrating on that. And that's why I think you need, especially if you're going to write about these things, you need the multiple viewings, because you need to watch it as a film and get the
Exactly.
enjoyment out of it, and then watch it as a critic or a reviewer to then look beyond that kind of surface level.
Yeah, absolutely. It does sometimes with certain movies. It does take a two or three watches before you really figure it out. And it's like, I finally last weekend I finally saw the movie Sinners. Um, and I'm kind of thinking I need to probably go back at some point and watch it a second time to see if it is one of those type of movies where I know I probably missed some things on the first viewing that I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it. And I had the same thing with Midsummer, and like the
Oh,
first time I watched it, I was like, okay, that was odd. And then I had to watch it a second time to really kind of figure some things out. And I end up with a whole different point of view on the movie than most, but still, just saw different things in it that you don't see the first time around.
yeah, which is why, because it's like this whole term of elevated horror, like
Hmm.
with Ari Aster and Robert Eggers being the kind of the forefront of that. But if you actually look, horror's always been elevated. It's more maybe possibly mainstream to a certain extent these days than it possibly has been previously, um, because it was often associated with porn. The two were seen as both kind
Right.
of levels of, oh, if you're in these sort of films, they're interchangeable. They're
Yeah.
not legitimate.
As a horror fan, that always bugged me back then because I will often argue if you really pay attention, the performances and the hard work that goes into making these movies, in my opinion, are just as worthy as any mainstream movie that you watch because of really the work. Because most of these are young actors that getting their start, so they're obviously trying to make a good impression. They're not phoning it in. I've seen worse performances in your so-called elevated horror movies than I have with certain 80s slasher films, to be
Mm,
honest, just because it seems like on some of the performances seem almost too stoic, too monotone, I guess.
yeah,
Whereas these characters that you're seeing in these other films feel more real. They feel like they have a personality. They feel like your next door neighbor or someone you worked with or your brother or sister and so forth. And I know I'm going off going off a
no,
tangent, but that's one of my critiques of newer movies over the last 10 years or so, but I didn't get that with Sinners. I really enjoyed the performances and the characters in that movie. And same, I mean, there's plenty of other good horror movies out there, but there seems to be a lot more movies where the characters just feel kind of dull, I guess, is one of my
mm.
critiques of newer horror films or newer movies in general, I think. That's my soapbox for today. But so, what are some of your favorite? As you were growing up, getting in the horror genre, what were some of your favorite horror movies?
I've always had a soft spot for anthology horror, especially the older ones.
Okay.
Um, so the Amicus anthology series. So
Hmm.
um, the Tales from the Crypt film. It has, for me, one of the most shocking short and you see nothing. It's just a suggestion at the end. It's called Blind Alley, and it's
Uh-huh.
about a gentleman who is an owner of a home for blind people. And so he stops feeding them food, proper food, turns off the
Hmm.
heating because he's like, you're blind, you don't need these things. And
Right.
so they set up an elaborate maze. They starve his dog, and along the walls they have like razor blades, and they turn out the lights, and you just
Oh,
hear them release the dog as he's in the in this hallway of razor blades, and it just goes black, and you hear the dog, and that's just it. And every time I've watched it, and I know what's coming, it's like, oh, it just. I like horror that gets under your skin rather than
right.
horror that frightens me. I prefer to be creeped out rather than scared.
Right. So, okay, yeah, that's one I haven't seen in a long time either. I was thinking of anthologies, and one that popped in my head, and this goes back to maybe 61 or 62, but Black Sabbath, directed by
Yes.
Mario Bava and starring Boris Karloff, actually was one that I don't know if that's the first horror anthology movie, but it's
No, I think the
first
first one
I
would
can
be
think. Go
it'd
ahead.
be Dead of Night. It's a
Oh,
British one from 1945,
okay.
and it's basically a gentleman turns up at a hotel, and he
Hmm.
tells all the people in the hotel that he's had dreams about them, and so each section is the dreams that he's had. And the most infamous one from Dead of Night is the possessed puppet, the ventriloquist dummy, and whether
Uh-huh.
or not the dummy is the killer or whether or not it's the ventriloquist. And that one is quite unsettling as well. I don't like dolls. I don't like dolls, mannequins, anything like that. Again, it's back to that kind of uncanny valley
Right.
creepiness. Yeah. But
I
yeah,
just
if you've
wrote
never
that
seen Dead of
down.
Night, I highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I just wrote it down. I'll add it, add another one to my watch list for sure. But yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like. There's plenty of. I mean, there's some newer Halloween themed anthology movies I like Tales of Halloween and Trick or Treat. I think one that often gets talked a lot about is Stephen King's. I'm gonna lose my can't, Creep Show is
Yes.
obviously a very popular, directed by George Romero. Um, and then I'm gonna like space out on some other ones I should be remembering right now, but can't right now. There was Tales of the Dark Side. I remember that.
Oh, yes. And then you've got the VHS series, which are a bit
Mhm.
hit and miss. They seem to be like the odd ones seem to be okay, and then the even ones seem to be a bit hit and miss. So some of
I'm
those, again, have. I think the thing about anthologies, which works in its favor, is if that particular section you don't like, chances
mhm.
are it's only 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes long at most.
Yeah.
So it can go to the next thing very quickly. What I don't like is the which is ironic considering what my book is called, but the A to Z ones, because they are too short. Because you're trying to squeeze 26
Yeah.
sections into maybe an hour and a half. So you're getting
Mhm.
some that are just 5 minutes long and they end and you go, okay, but what happened? I don't like those ones so much. But
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that's something you should break up into about probably like you could probably make a 4 or 5 movie series where you could then
yeah,
break them up a little bit rather than trying to cram everything into one movie. It would seem that would have been the a better way to go, or to do just a whole like a whole television series maybe where each episode is
yeah.
for each letter would have probably worked better for that, I would think
I mean,
anyway.
Creep
So
Show has proven the Creep Show TV series has proven that they can do that. So yeah, that
mhm.
I can't see why that would work quite well. Like I said, half an hour, even if they're two, A is for apple, for example, and then just do 2 stories around an apple. Then next week, then do another letter.
Yeah, yeah, that would have probably seemed to me they. I don't know. Maybe they should like. Maybe if they're listening to this program, and they're probably not. Maybe those who made it will say, maybe we should go back and redo that and do what they said. Let's make it a
Yeah.
26 episode series, or break it up into 3 or 4 seasons with however we want to break it up, 8 episodes a season or whatever.
Yeah.
You could do that, but yeah, that would have worked a lot better. I happen to know that, and I had her on. It's this actress who's in Scotland. Her name's Megan Trimothick, and she works with um, British Horror Studio,
Mm.
and they are doing something called. They should be releasing it soon anyway, called A Grip of Terror, which is going to be kind of an homage to the Amicus, um, anthologies you were talking about. So
Yeah,
that,
I support them through Patreon. So yeah,
oh, good, me too. So,
I, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I waited because I did it, so I got the Amicus T-shirt. So I'm waiting for that to turn up once they get to that point. But yeah, and that's another thing I like to do as well, is I do like to try and support stuff on Kickstarter as well, and
yeah,
places like that to try and give these films, a little bit of
yeah.
money, because it's nice to get more independent horror out there.
Oh, I agree, and it was great having her on, and because I've like, I wish I could support more, but finances being what they are. But yeah, because I remember on their Kickstarter donating to, I think it was the Slave and the Sorcerer. I remember doing that one. I don't know if you've seen that one, and then I did Grip of Terror. So I'm um, waiting for my copy whenever that happens. It'll be a surprise, but yeah, and I've had other indie filmmakers on too whenever I get a chance to meet one. So it's like, hey, want to come on the show? Absolutely. So wonderful. So do you have any with this book that's come out now? Do you have any future projects that you have planned out as far as the next book? And will that be another nonfiction book, or are you going back to the world of fiction?
No, I think I'm going to be in the world of non-fiction for a while.
Okay.
So when I started the first A to Z, because I didn't know how many films I'd end up watching, I started by doing, say, 2 for A. So I'd like A for Alien and then A
Mm,
for Anthology, in case I didn't have enough films.
right.
It soon became clear that I was going to have more than enough films. So a lot of what was doubled in the first book, I've now done a second book. So another A to Z of So Bad They're Good. I'm about, if I'm taking the first book as a kind of benchmark, I'm about halfway through that one. But
Hmm.
I'm also doing another A to Z. So when you come across these sort of films, I was expecting, there's what I thought was going to be a So Bad They're Good film. It was called, and I always get this the wrong way around, Della Morte Della More, or Cemetery Man.
Oh, yeah, I know Cemetery Man. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, right, we've got Rupert Everett in it, who isn't known for doing horror. It's Italian, which again, they can be a little bit on the campy side.
Right.
You've got zombies and you've got a decapitated child bride in it. I thought this is going to
Yes.
be So Bad They're Good heaven.
Yeah.
But when I watched it, I was just blown away about how amazing that film actually is. And it played on my mind so much that when I had friends around the next weekend, I made them watch the film straight away. And I
Hmm.
wanted to talk about the film, and I was going, I can't justify it as a So Bad They're Good film. I thought it's a wonderfully weird film. And then I thought about other films that I've watched that are either not horror or above the So Bad They're Good bracket that I started. So the other A to Z is going to be of wonderfully weird films. So it's still going to be
Oh,
predominantly
wow.
horror centric, because
Uh-huh.
that it tends to be what I watch the most.
Right.
But there is M for musicals. So we've got some of the more outlandish musicals that are out there, like Repo, the Genetic Opera, or Tommy, which has no horror elements in it whatsoever, but is absolutely insane. And then I can do K for Kung Fu. And so I've got some of the weirder kung fu movies that are out there. And so, and
There you
also that
go.
I get to talk about stuff I like and not try and find stuff about films that are absolutely insane, but are bad. I, I just wanted to
Well,
highlight
and
films that,
that's the best part is finding you enjoy the most.
but I kind of wanted to highlight films that people might have overlooked because of their either the weird choices of actors or the weird premise or knowing that it's shot in a weird way to actually go, yeah, this element of it is weird, but it's still worth a watch because of everything else. And so I'm doing the two simultaneously. So once I run out of so bad they're good films, which I'm at the moment, because I keep picking films that I think are going to be so bad they're good, and then they're actually genuinely good films. So I'm now working on the
Like
Wonderfully Weird one
Cemetery,
at the
and
moment.
yeah, I watched Cemetery Man for the first time. I think 4 or 5 months ago. I'd seen it recommended, and of course, my watch list is probably 200 movies on there. That's the thing about horror. Every time you think you've seen it all, you find 300 more movies that you haven't seen yet because there's just so many that you get lost in the cracks for one reason or another. So I venture to say there's probably been more movies made in that genre than any other genre, it seems like. But yeah, Cemetery Man, that was a really, I mean, it's it almost plays out like a dark comedy almost to a
Yeah,
certain certain level. But yeah, that was a very well done movie for sure. So excellent. Well, that sounds great. Beverly, thanks for being on the show. Everyone, you can find anyone that is on Substack, you can find her under Beverly's Horror Corner. I have
yep,
the link below, along with her newest book, which once again is called A to Z of the So Bad They're Good, the Bad and Ugly Horror Films. I had to write it down in case I forgot. So anyhow, but thanks everyone for watching. Give us a
thank you.
like uh, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will see you on the next episode. Good evening. Good night, everyone.
Night.
And